This is the Fantasy Ladder Podcast, episode 33. I'm your host, Steve at Fantasy Ladder. This podcast is brought to you by the IDP Guys Network. So, welcome back once again, my fantasy football friends and family. Let's climb the ladder of fantasy football together. So, this is going to be part two of the week eight matchup previews. If you missed part one, just go back onto the podcast feed or back on the channel. I was joined by Matt Record of the IDP Guys, a writer and a content creator, where we went through the Thursday night game, the Sunday London game, the Sunday night game, and the Monday night game, going through the same process that I'll be going through for the rest of the Sunday slate here. So if you missed that, go check that out. And we had some fun, of course, at the top of the show. Matt was an awesome guest, so please check that one out. So today, going to go through the Sunday early slate, the Sunday later slate for the later afternoon games, and then answer your start sit questions. So just wanted to remind you again off the top here. Every Wednesday, I put out a tweet asking if there's anything I can help you with your start sit questions. So some people have been taking full advantage of that. So I welcome that. I love that. Hopefully, we can help you out and sharpen your process and the way you approach your matchups. At the end of the day, we are here to optimize your lineups or at least help you along the way with that. So before we get into the matchups, just wanted to remind you of the teams that are on bye this week. We have the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers on bye. So two big time quarterbacks, two good tight ends, a lot of good running backs and wide receivers. Although there are some injuries there in LA, as we discussed in part one. So, kicking off today's episode, we are going to do the early slates, starting with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Philadelphia Eagles. On the Steelers side of the ball, I'm going to be trusting Najee Harris and Pat Fryermuth. Kenny Pickett for me is a bust in this game against a really tough Philadelphia Eagles defense on the road. Pickett did struggle a bit in that Sunday night game in Miami. I don't know why this game would be any different. Now, with the wide receivers there in Pittsburgh, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Chase Claypool, they are all if you must candidates for me, but definitely a little bit of a hierarchy with you'd be prioritizing Deontay Johnson, then Pickens, and then Chase Claypool, who's a little bit of a deeper flex. Deontay Johnson's more of a starter, shallow flex, and then Pickens is a flex to like a mid depth flex league. There's some leagues out there where you have to start three wide receivers and have three flex plays. In that kind of a case, I think Claypool and Pickens are safely in play, but in a deeper league, I think Pickens would be in play over Claypool. And then on the Eagles side of the ball, start all your Eagles. Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goddard. You can start all these guys very comfortably. Just wanted to remind you of the trust if you must and bust system here. So trust is our players you're just starting regardless of the format every week. You should feel confident in putting them into your lineup uh, week in and week out. If you must, are players that either have a weaker matchup, have ambiguous use in the offense. Um, in that case, in a more shallow league, I would fall on the side of perhaps benching them. In a deeper league, I would fall on the side of starting them. So it's very league dependent, um, league format dependent, and your bench option dependent. Then bust are players that you're fine to have on your roster, but just are not ready to get them into that starting lineup just yet. This may become more challenging, however, when you're dealing with injuries and when you're dealing with bye weeks. So um, definitely best to avoid, but don't want to just drop them or write them off just yet. So that's the Steelers at the Eagles. Always fun to have a Pennsylvania based matchup there in Philadelphia. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers at the Atlanta Falcons. On the Panthers side of the ball, I think Philip Walker, who will be the starter in this game, is a super flex option. Joe Burrow just absolutely lit up the Falcons in the previous week. I'm not expecting 500 total yards from Philip Walker like Joe Burrow put on there, but I think he's fine as a super flex option. I think DJ Moore, very encouraging week 7 against the Buccaneers, but he just will remain an if you must option, borderline trust if you must. So I think you could if you must with a little bit of confidence there, just because of the lack of pass catchers in that offense, a lot of volume potential. Now in the running backs, it's a little dicey. Donta Foreman was extremely productive after Chuba Hubbard left the game. Chuba Hubbard actually was on a pretty good start to the game as well last week. So Hubbard is now questionable for this matchup. So keep an eye on that. Foreman would be more of a trustworthy option for me if no Hubbard. If Hubbard is active, both of them are if you must options, and you're not really going to like it a lot. Hopefully, you can go a different direction there. But if you must for now, on the Falcons side of the ball, Marcus Mariota is more of a super flex option. I still don't feel super confident starting any of the running backs in the Atlanta game or in the Atlanta rushing game if you can help it. Tyler Algier, I think, is definitely a good add. I mean, he should have been on your rosters at this point, just on the bench there. Not super thrilled to get him starting just yet, especially since there's only 2 teams on bye. You should have better options there. Drake London is a borderline if you must slash bust candidate just because they're just not running the ball a ton. Um, Early on in the season, he was getting a lot of targets, being very productive with those, just has not been there as of late, which brings me to Kyle Pitts. Again, very talented. This is not an issue of his talent at all. It's just kind of how this offense has been operating. He is an if you must tight end option, and Marcus Mariota remains a super flex option because of the rushing upside that he has just with his game there. So kind of a yucky matchup there, but definitely some potential, but kind of won't want to stay away from this matchup for sure. Chicago Bears at the Dallas Cowboys. So on the Bears side of the ball, you're trusting Justin Fields. He has been dominant as a rushing quarterback here, putting up just fantastic numbers using his legs. So I think you can trust Fields despite the tough matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. If you must options on the Bears are Darnell Mooney and David Montgomery. Cowboys side, I think you can trust CD Lamb and Tony Pollard, especially if Ezekiel Elliott does not suit up for this game. He is questionable at this point. Just keep an eye on that. But Tony Pollard, if there's no Zeke, I mean, you're trusting him. He's an RB1 option in that case. Dak Prescott is a borderline trust slash super flex option. I'd be fine with him. And then Dalton Schultz is an if you must slash trust for tight ends. It's just the nature of the position, right? Um, He's a quality player, but is still coming back from that knee injury. He caught five. He caught all 5 of his targets last week, so that's encouraging. But is still only playing around 50% of the snaps. So he'll become much more of a trustworthy option once he is playing more routinely and still being involved in the offense. So for now, he's an if you must option. Looking at the Miami Dolphins now against the Detroit Lions, you're starting all your Dolphins. So Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert. You're starting all of them with confidence. The only iffy one right now is Mike Gesicki. He's just this kind of again, he's just in this like tier of tight ends where I mean, you kind of want to hold your nose and start him. I mean, he could get you more than 10 points or he can get you 3. So I think Gesicki is definitely more of an if you must option. And then the Detroit Lions side of the ball, Jared Goff is a borderline trustworthy quarterback, definitely a super flex option. You can definitely trust TJ Hawkinson and Amon-Ra St. Brown as long as they are healthy and active for this game. Jamal Williams is also a trust if there's no DeAndre Swift. He becomes more of an if you must if Swift is active than if Swift is active. You're starting him. You just have to start DeAndre Swift. Do not make that mistake. I could take it if he only scores 5 points in limited time because you know he has the upside to score 25 points. So It's kind of a weird one for fantasy purposes. I just can't imagine if he's active not starting Swift. So definitely just keep an eye on the practice updates on Friday, Saturday, and then leading up to Sunday morning, of course. Then we got a very interesting matchup here: the Arizona Cardinals at the Minnesota Vikings. You're starting all these guys in this game. So Kyler Murray, Zach Ertz, DeAndre Hopkins are all for certain trustworthy players. The running game in Arizona is kind of interesting right now. James Conner has been practicing, but he's still questionable at this point. If he is active, it kind of muddies everything for that backfield. Let's just, for example, say he's out. If he's ruled out, I think you can still trust Benjamin. Keontae Ingram did play very well in that Thursday night game. That seemingly came out of nowhere, but it's out of necessity. No Darrell Williams and no James Conner, so Benjamin can't play every single snap. But Benjamin did very well, and so did Ingram. But with these guys being active on game day, Ingram is still a good stash, especially in Dynasty, but definitely not starting him. However, if there's no Connor, I am definitely trusting Benjamin. If Connor is active, uh, him and Benjamin are if you must options. Not going to feel great about it either way. On the Vikings side of the ball, you're trusting all your Vikings: Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, obviously, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Irv Smith. Definitely can feel confident starting all of them against Arizona. Another matchup here is the Las Vegas Raiders at the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints did declare Andy Dalton the starter, even though Jameis Winston is healthy at this point. So don't love that, even though he has been throwing a lot of touchdowns. There have just been a lot of turnovers as well. So he's a borderline super flex play for me. Although I will be trusting Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara. The tight ends in the New Orleans offense, Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson, are if you must options against the Raiders. And on the Raiders side of the ball, I am trusting Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, and Josh Jacobs, of course, who has just been an absolute monster, as I discussed with Matt in part one. Darren Waller is questionable at this point. So that's really just has become a very irritating situation. If he's active, I would feel obligated to start him. Obviously, he's a very dynamic tight end. If he's out, I think Foster Moreau is an interesting, if you must, tight end option here against the Saints. And then Hunter Renfro is just a bust level player at this point. Fine to have on your roster, fine to have on your bench, but you just can't start him at this point until we see him consistently um, playing snaps and getting targets as he's coming back from the concussion from a few weeks back. Moving on to the New England Patriots at the New York Jets. The trustable options here for me are Michael Carter on the Jets. That's it. Zach Wilson is just barely a super flex option. I don't want to start any of the pass catchers in the New York Jets offense. Kind of an interesting situation is happening in the Jets organization. Elijah Moore, who was fantastic as a rookie, uh, really has not been involved in the offense much. He did request a trade last week. He was not active for the game last week. I can't imagine that he'll be active again, just as he just doesn't want to be there, basically. It's kind of a weird thing. But even the starters that are there, Corey Davis and Garrett Wilson, Tyler Conklin, the tight end, just not getting a lot of volume. Really hard to rely on that production in the passing game, which they really haven't needed to use because their defense has been so rock solid in the last several weeks. So it's just kind of an interesting. It's just not really how I saw it play out. And unfortunately, as we mentioned in part one, Brees Hall is out for the season, which is why Michael Carter becomes a more trustworthy option. Now, the Jets did trade for and brought in James Robinson from the Jaguars. He would be a bust for me this week. I don't know how much he'll be implemented, if he even plays at all in this matchup. I mean, he may play a few snaps just to get like uh, into some rhythm and trying to get used to the plays or whatever. But Can't imagine he's going to do much for fantasy purposes. Fine to hold him, fine to even, try to acquire him, as a buy low right now, as he'll need to ramp up here into the offense. But obviously, a great player. Just not going to use him yet this week, especially against the Patriots, who traditionally are a tough team to play against. On the New England side of the ball, definitely trusting Ramondre Stevenson, as I mentioned, and Jacoby Myers. Devontae Parker, another wide receiver, is more of an if you must, more of like a deeper flex play. Tyquan Thornton would remain a bust candidate at this time. Good to have on your bench, but just not really super confident in starting him or really anyone else on that offense. Keep your eye on Damian Harris as he'll be kind of slowly brought back into this offense alongside of Stevenson. Not ready to start him yet either. Um, Sort of an interesting situation is happening with the quarterbacks in New England in the Monday night game. Mac Jones definitely struggled and threw an interception. Then he was benched for Bailey Zappi, who actually was playing decently well. Again, not really lighting the world on fire in the fantasy realm, but just winning games. I mean, he has been solid enough. But Mac Jones was named the starter, so he will come in as a barely super flex option against a tough Jets defense. Don't really want to rely on him if I can help it until he just plays more solidly and is just the long term starter. That would be preferable, but against the Jets, want to be avoiding that if I can help it. So that'll do it for the Sunday early slate. We are now going to be answering a few listener start sit questions. So appreciate everyone asking. Let's get right into it. So we have at Triathlete Chef. He's got a three-part question here. First, he asks a quarterback question: Dak Prescott against the Bears or Tua Tagovailoa against the Detroit Lions? I'm going with Tua here. Just a better matchup overall against the Lions. Better overall weapons with Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Uh, so I'll go with Tua. I think just a little bit more upside at this point, especially against the Lions. Asking for a PPR flex play, he lists five options: Darnell Mooney against the Cowboys, Donta Foreman against the Falcons, George Pickens against the Eagles, Benjamin against the Vikings, and Alec Pierce against the Commanders. So my breakdown is this, and there's a lot of qualifiers. So triathlete chef, just bear with me here. My priority would be Benjamin against the Vikings if James Conner is not active. If Conner is active, he kind of doesn't become as appealing to me as I said in that game's matchup preview. My next priority would be Donta Foreman if no Chuba Hubbard. If Hubbard is active, then he becomes less appealing in the same way Benjamin would become less appealing. So in that case, if it's between Mooney, Pickens, and Pierce, I'm going to go with Pickens. Seems a little bit counterintuitive going up against the Eagles with their rookie quarterback who struggled. Last game against the Dolphins, he just has been having the most steady amount of targets. You could say the same for Alec Pierce, although against the Commanders this week, Matt Ryan was benched, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So they're rolling out Sam Ellinger for his first ever career start in the NFL. That kind of gives me a little bit of the heebie jeebies. So Alec Pierce, again, still fine to have, but just not ready to start him yet. So he's just a no. Then Darnell Mooney against the Cowboys, definitely trying to avoid that. But he is still an if you must. I just would have a little bit of a priority for George Pickens. So just to recap, it'd be Benjamin, first priority if no Connor, then Donta Foreman if no Hubbard, but if Hubbard and Connor are active, I would be going with George Pickens against the Eagles. Then he asks a DST question asking about the Miami Dolphins against the Detroit Lions, the Atlanta Falcons against the Panthers, as well as the Panthers against the Falcons, Seattle against the New York Giants, Cincinnati against the Cleveland Browns, Raiders against the Saints, Washington against the Colts. So Carolina played tremendously well against the Buccaneers last week. That win just like basically came out of nowhere. It was fantastic to see. Um, So that's not a bad option against the Falcons. I did recommend the Bengals against the Falcons last week. They only held them to 17 points, which is pretty good. Had 3 sacks, but did not force any turnovers. So that was a little bit disappointing. So Carolina is definitely an interesting option for sure. But I am going to be going with the Commanders here against the Colts. Just trying to capitalize on that quarterback's first career start. And just some of the uncertainty that can exist there. They still have a very strong front seven, a couple good pieces there in the secondary, so that they can apply pressure and make them panic and throw the ball in an unideal way. That's sort of the logic that I'm going with against the Colts. I think there could be decent sack upside as well as turnover upside, just in this guy's first career start. So that's the way I would go for the DST streamer there. At Pipomatic, he asks for tight end and quarterback questions. Dalton Schultz against the Bears or Tyler Higbee against the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going with Tyler Higbee just because of the consistency in the playing time and the consistent higher target volume in that Rams offense, which has been a little bit of a mess. But Higbee is definitely getting a lot of targets compared to Schultz at this point. Again, this answer of Higbee over Schultz could definitely be reversed in maybe 3 weeks' time as Dalton Schultz just slowly gets more involved in the offense as he's coming back from the knee injury. So for this particular week, I'm going with Higbee over Schultz. Then quarterback, he asks Lamar Jackson against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Thursday night or Daniel Jones against the Seattle Seahawks. In this case, I'm going with Lamar, just more of a sure thing, even though Danny Dimes has been fantastic over the last several weeks, especially because he has been running the ball. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to be going with Lamar, just more of the proven asset over time, and just has an amount of upside that Daniel Jones just does not have. So there's been a couple of games where Lamar Jackson has been scoring over 40 points. You're not going to get that every single week. The last 4 weeks, so last week was a little bit of a down week. 10 points. The last 3 weeks, he's had 17, hovering around 17 points. And then he had the two blow up games and a 20-point game before that. Daniel Jones has been pretty much safely between 21 and 15 points the majority of the weeks, but give me Lamar Jackson, just a lot more upside there, just much more proven over time, um, with a pretty banged up Buccaneers defense. So that's also a major part of it. So best of luck there. At Mario underscore powers underscore up asks PPR pick two. He's got some really good options here, but this is the way I'm going to be approaching it. He's got T. Higgins against the Browns on Monday Night Football, DeAndre Hopkins against the Vikings, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown against the Dolphins. Picking two here, I'm going DeAndre Hopkins and Amon-Ra St. Brown. It would be a tough decision to bench Higgins, between these three, but just less target competition for Hopkins and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the target upside is just much higher for Amon-Ra St. Brown in general compared to Higgins because he just has to deal with Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd and just a lot more to go around compared to Amon-Ra St. Brown when he is active. So that's a big if because he is questionable right now. So if Amon-Ra St. Brown is looking worse and worse throughout the week of practices and maybe is very, very questionable going into the Sunday game, then obviously Higgins would be a fine fallback. But I'm going with Hopkins, very encouraged by what I saw in the Thursday night game. Basically just left off right where he was as a pure wide receiver one. So Hopkins and Amon-Ra St. Brown for me. Good luck, Mario. And then last but certainly not least, we have at Chimichanga 484. He has to pick three between David Montgomery against the Dallas Cowboys, Devin Singletary against the Packers, Travis Etienne against the Denver Broncos, Michael Carter against the the Patriots. And then he also just mentions two other flex options just to kind of throw some in there. Allen Robinson of the Rams, obviously, against the 49ers, and Garrett Wilson against the Patriots. So for me, I'm recognizing right now that David Montgomery has the toughest matchup between the four running backs. So Dallas has been just legitimately tough of a defensive unit. David Montgomery, as of late, has been a little bit touchdown dependent and not getting a lot of work in the passing game compared to ETN, Carter, and Singletary that they have shown to this point of the season. Travis Etienne is a starter for me. No James Robinson to throw him off, so he could just be getting a lot of volume. Jermichael Hasty is still there, but I think it's just going to be the continuing to be the Travis Etienne show against a tough Denver Broncos team. Um, Not really going to shy away from him just because of that. I guess you could have a little bit of caution there because the Broncos are a legitimate defense, but I'm very excited for Travis Etienne. This is what we've been waiting for. No James Robinson in his way. Devin Singletary, I'm also going to be recommending you start because the Packers have just been completely exposed defensively the last 3 weeks, especially. Um, um, Opposing running backs have just completely taken advantage of that defense. Saquon Barkley in London, Brees Hall, obviously. And then last week, both Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson both had fantastic games against them. So there's definitely a lot of trouble there in the Packers for whatever reason. On paper, they are a fantastic defense, but as of late, running backs have been doing very well against them, and it's the Bills. Uh, really stout defense. They will be in a position to hopefully be successful running the ball as their stout defense may keep Aaron Rodgers off the field. So give me Devin Singletary and then Michael Carter simply because of the volume he could be getting against the Patriots without Brees Hall, unfortunately, and with James Robinson just being slowly acclimated to the offense. As I mentioned before, with Garrett Wilson, great talent, just not ready to put him into lineups at this point after the pretty hot start he had to the season. Then Allen Robinson, just a little too volatile and just generally speaking, just not involved in this offense. He has 2 games this season of 15 or more fantasy points, but then 4 games this season of less than 5 fantasy points. So they're just coming off the bye week, so perhaps they're going to find a way to get him implemented. I'm not sure if just the bye week will magically fix this or not, but definitely happy to have him on my roster, just not ready to start him just yet. So Chimichanga 44, Devin Singletary, Travis Etienne, and Michael Carter is what I would recommend. Best of luck to you and the rest of everyone who asked. Appreciate you asking. Ultimately you're going to be the one pressing the lineup submit button there. So best of luck, but I hope I was able to help you through the thought process of making the best lineup decisions. Now we're going to finish off our show with the Sunday later slate of games, starting with the Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. On the Titans side of the ball, the only player I'm remotely interested in started in this one is Derrick Henry. Ryan Tannehill is a little bit questionable in this one. He would be a borderline flex play, even at best, even if he's 100% healthy. So it's just Derrick Henry and no one else on that offense right now. On the Texans side of the ball, very confident to start Damian Pierce. He's been a very exciting player. Brandon Cooks. He gets a little bit of a boost up here because Nico Collins left the game last week with an injury. So he may be out this week and maybe for an extended period of time. Hate to see that, but it just does help Cooks' opportunity. And then Davis Mills there is a super flex option for the Texans. Moving on to the Commanders at the Colts. On the Commanders side of the ball, I'm going to be starting a lot of these guys. I'd be pretty comfortable with both Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, of course, and Curtis Samuel is a trust for me if Jahan Dotson is out. He is questionable right now. He missed the last couple of games. So if Dotson is out, then Samuel becomes a borderline trust if you must type. But he is a firm if you must if Jahan Dotson is active, just to limit that target upside. Um, and then Heineke, the quarterback for the Commanders, is a super flex option against the Colts. On the Colts side of the ball, I'm trusting Jonathan Taylor if he's active. I'm trusting Michael Pittman if he's active. Players like Naeem Hines, really I don't think that there's enough teams on buy for him to really be considered a deep flex play. So he's like and if you must at best, if this quarterback who is having his first career start is just not able to move the ball down the field, perhaps he could get some dump off. So he has got a little bit of PPR upside. But Taylor if he's active, Michael Pittman if he's active, Alec Pierce is more of an if you must type for me, borderline bust this week. Um, a little bit of an interesting resurgence here with Paris Campbell. Had a really strong week last week, but he just is always so tempting. He's fine to have on your roster at this point in seasonal leagues, even in like dynasty leagues as well, obviously, but just really difficult to get him into your starting lineup right now. And then Sam um, Ellinger is definitely a bust for me. I do not want to start him in his first career start, even in a super flex league. He would not be a top 24 quarterback for me, despite some good offensive pieces there on the Colts. Um, which is basically why I would be recommending the Commanders defense, just to see how shaky this initial start is for the young QB. Again, with Matt Ryan being benched, he has been named the starter for the remainder of the season, so it might just be like a work in progress. Um, Very intrigued to see what he can do, but I will just go on the side of just um, you know going with the Commanders with a guy who just has not had a career start yet. So, yeah. 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. On the Rams side of the ball, I'll start there. That's a little bit more concise. Cooper Cup, Tyler Higbee, Daryl Henderson are who I can trust here. Cam Akers is, I believe, he's either questionable or doubtful for this matchup. I know that he has been in trade talks here to the Rams have been in trade talks to send Akers away, so they're probably are just trying to keep him fresh and not active on game day. Really can't trust him in your lineups. Then Matthew Stafford would basically come in as a super flex option. Um, Allen Robinson, don't want to start him. He's more of a bust, but definitely fine to have on your rosters. On the 49ers side of the ball, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a start or a trust, rather. Christian McCaffrey in his second game now with the team had kind of a frustrating fantasy wise scenario last week. Um, was decently productive with the opportunities he had, but was only playing in what was it, 28% of the snaps. So he will be I think is going to be fine in this offense, but if he's active, you got to start him. Debo Samuel right now is questionable. Keep an eye on him. Uh, Brandon Ayuk is an if you must, but he will definitely become a trust if Debo Samuel just remains questionable all week long. So definitely like both of them, as well as George Kittle, obviously in that 49ers offense. So definitely like a lot of the 49ers against the Rams. Then to finish off the show here, we got the New York Giants at the Seattle Seahawks. The trustworthy players on the Giants are Daniel Jones. I think you can start him just because of that rushing upside. Saquon Barkley, of course, having just a phenomenal season. And then Wando Robinson comes in as more of an if you must, sort of a deeper league flex play, a very exciting player, but just is not getting implemented to the way that I would prefer as a trustworthy wide receiver. So definitely a good option, but more of an if you must. deeper league situation. On the Seahawks side of the ball, DK Metcalf did get injured in week 7, so he's questionable right now, basically unlikely to play. So even if he is active, it's going to be hard to trust him. I'm basically just recommending to not start him, even though typically when he's active, you basically are going to want him in your lineup and just take like the peaks and valleys that come with his game. Kenneth Walker has been phenomenal. Unfortunately, since Rashad Penny got hurt, but Kenneth Walker, you're absolutely trusting him. Tyler Lockett is questionable right now. I think is more likely to play. He is definitely a trustworthy option. Then Geno Smith, kind of like Daniel Jones, is a surprising trust candidate here for quarterback. So definitely questionable, kind of an if you must for a single QB league, but definitely a solid super flex option against the Giants, who again have been playing very good defense as of late. But I think you can still trust Geno Smith to a certain degree with how he has played this season. So that's going to do it for Week 8 preview matchups. Um, if you like this video, or if you enjoy this content, please like the video. Of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel and add the IDP Guys Network to your podcast feed. Again, I'm Steve at Fantasy Ladder here. Just wishing you well. We're hoping you have good luck in your matchups. I hope you enjoy the games, and yeah, just keep climbing.